Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to part 3, typical applications for multi-lane highways from our Introduction to the Minnesota Temporary Traffic Control Field Manual for Highway Workers webinar series. So our course instructor is John Jackals, who works at SRF Consulting Group and has more than 40 years of ITS and traffic engineering experience. He is actively involved in local, regional, and national associations, including the Minnesota County Engineering Association's Traffic Safety Committee, the American Traffic Safety Services Association, and the Institute of Traffic Engineers, and the FHWA's Enterprise Pooled Fund Study. John has presented at numerous conferences and served on many technical committees for research and project development. I'm going to remind you that our webinar today counts for 0.25 Road Scholar Program Maintenance Certificate credits. If you there will be a message that comes out after the webinar to remind you that you can send me an email if you're hoping to get Road Scholar credits for this webinar. All right, I will turn it over to John to get us started this morning.
Thank you, Samantha. Good morning, everyone. Don't forget to put questions in the question and answer box if you have any, and Samantha can interrupt me at any time to answer those questions. Just want to note that the workshop is being presented by the local technical assistance program in Minnesota through the Center of Transportation Studies at the university. And we have plenty of partners with Federal Highway and Local Road Research Board. This is part 3 of a 5-series webinar that's going on talking about multi-lane roads. We'll be covering the basic provisions and standards for temporary traffic control, commonly called work zone traffic control for multi-lane roadways, including both undivided roadways and divided roadways. We'll also discuss continuous two-way left turn lanes today, work zone speed limits, and multi-lane roundabouts. Before getting started, it's important to review the MnDOT creed that's included in the field manual. Always remember, no job is so important in maintenance or construction, and no service so urgent that we cannot take time to perform our work safely. Whenever you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, bring this to the attention of your supervisor or manager. Remember, our goal is that everyone, workers, motorists, bicycle riders, and pedestrians arrive safely at their destinations. The Minnesota Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices for Streets and Highways has been established to provide a uniform policy for all traffic control devices on all public streets, roads, and highways within the state of Minnesota. This manual was prepared pursuant to authority vested in the state of Minnesota Department of Transportation as provided in Minnesota Statute Section 16906, Subdivision 1. Standards described within this manual may also be used by private agencies on facilities which they control that are open to public travel. The field manual is part of the Minnesota Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices that covers temporary traffic control that's in place 3 days or less. It must be remembered that the goal of temporary traffic control zone is to provide for safe and efficient movement of traffic around a location where the normal function of the roadway is temporarily suspended. To accomplish this, respect to the driver must be earned by appropriate and prudent use of traffic control devices. When work is not in progress or the hazard no longer exists, the temporary traffic control devices should be turned, covered, or removed from the area. The equipment and devices used that we're going to discuss today were detailed in part 1. They include high visibility clothing, vehicle warning lights, channelizing devices, signing, arrow boards, and portable changeable message signs. If you missed part 1, the recording is available for you to view on the LTAP website. The field manual is divided in primarily by roadway type. To determine the type of roadway that the space will be in, two-lane, two-way roadways, which were covered in part 2, multi-lane highways, divided and undivided, which we will cover today. There are some miscellaneous layouts that will be in part 4. Quality standards were included in part 1. And part 5, we'll talk about flagging. Let's get started with multi-lane undivided highways. Most layouts use variables for distances, allowing them to be used for multi-speed roadways. The main charts and tables are spacing for stationary work zones, traffic control distance charts, components of mobile work zones, roll-ahead distance charts for mobile work zones. So let's take a quick look at those and review those. You need to determine the appropriate device spacing for channelizers. This is shown on the temporary traffic control distance charts and components layout. Next, we need to know how far apart the cones will be in the taper, which is designated as G. G is the gap between the cones. At 45 miles an hour or higher, the G space is 50 feet. Through tangent areas where traffic is going straight, we can increase that space to 2G or 100 feet for high-speed roadways. Once the crew has determined the best layout to use, they'll then have to determine the placement of the advanced warning signs, message boards, and arrow boards if needed, barricades and channelizers. That information is found in the distance charts in the back cover of the field manual. We'll start with the components of a stationary work zone. So remember, we have to set up the devices in the order that drivers will see them. If we're closing the right lane on a 55-mile-an-hour road, the first advanced warning sign is a road work ahead, then the right lane closed, then the transition symbol or chimney sign. There's an A space between each of those. The merging taper is the longest taper and designated with an L. The taper length is in the top center column. Next, the shifting taper is 1/2 L. And the merging taper, excuse me, it's 1/2 the length of the merging taper. The shoulder taper is 1/3 the length of a merging taper. There are 2 tapers not shown on the chart, the downstream taper, which is always 100 feet, and the 2-way traffic taper, which isn't used very often in multi-lane roadways. The next area we need to build into the work zone is the buffer space. That's the area from the end of the taper to where the workspace begins. This area should always be left completely empty so that if a vehicle gets behind the cones, they'll have time to stop before hitting anything inside the workspace. In some instances, such as on city streets, there just may not be enough room to build in the buffer. So in those cases, the buffer space would be optional. But whenever there's enough room to put in the buffer, it's for everybody's safety. As you look at the layouts throughout the manual, you'll see various letter designations such as A, G, and L on the tables. You won't ever see D for distance on layouts. That's because this distance varies for every location. Let's talk a little bit about decision site distance. Decision site distance is defined as the total distance traveled during the length of time required for a driver to first detect an unexpected or otherwise difficult to perceive information source, such as a work zone or a hazard in the roadway environment that may be visually cluttered, Recognize a hazard or its potential threat, then select an appropriate speed and path, and initiate and complete the required maneuver safely and efficiently. In the field manual, the decision site distance is used to determine the minimum distance required for the driver to see a flagger, or see the work area. It is also used to determine if an operation qualifies as mobile. The required decision site distance is included in the temporary traffic control distance charts. You should always locate the advanced warning devices in a location where there's adequate decision site distance, especially for mobile operations. Before getting started in the two sections we're going to talk about this morning, let's take a look at an example of a right lane closure setup to determine the location of temporary traffic control devices. The first thing, once you select the layout, is to read the notes to see if it applies to your situation. In this case, the flashing arrow board shall be used where posted speed limit is 45 miles per hour or greater and shall be placed on the shoulder. If there's no shoulder or the shoulder is too narrow, place the arrow board at the end of the taper in lieu of the Type 3 barricade assembly. The right lane close or right lane close sign may be omitted when the posted speed limit is 40 miles an hour or less. If there is a shoulder, close the shoulder using a shoulder taper. Very important to read notes on all of the layouts. Let's recall from part 1 of this training that devices are installed in the order in which drivers will see them. That makes it necessary to determine the location of the first signs from both directions of travel. For this example, you will assume a posted speed limit of 55 miles an hour. The variable distance in advance of the intersection will be 200 feet, and there are no site restrictions requiring adjustment of the device locations. The distance charts can be found in the back cover of the field manual. For this example, the warning sign spacing is 750 feet. The merging taper length is 700 feet for 55 miles per hour. The roadwork ahead sign for the impacted direction of travel is 200 feet, which was the assumed distance of the area before the intersection, plus the 700-foot taper length, plus 4 times the 750-foot sign spacing, for a total of 3,900 feet. The roadwork ahead sign for the other direction is distance A, or 750 feet, in advance of the workspace. The channelizer spacing in this situation is G, or 50 feet. Part 1 of this series detailed the need to keep accurate records of temporary traffic controls used along any roadway and any modifications needed for that particular location. The need to conduct a drive-through to see the work zone from the driver's perspective is very important. Some considerations for this strategy and layout are: leave a radius large enough for turning vehicles from the major road in from both the cross street directions. If you can complete the work near the intersection and relocate the temporary traffic control devices to aid in these turning movements, it would be advantageous. Once the traffic controls are installed, to drive through the project from all approaches to ensure all the devices are visible, and especially if sight distance is blocked for vehicles entering from the cross street. If the lane closed barricade blocks the site in this case, if the posted speed limit is 40 miles an hour or less, it can be omitted. If the barricade and sign can also be replaced by 3 channelizers across the lane, it is recommended to note the reason for this in your field notes. Next, we'll look at components of a mobile work zone. The decision site distance comes into play here. The operation must move down the road at least a decision site distance in 15 minutes to qualify as mobile. As with stationary work zones, we're going to set this up in the order drivers will see the trucks. So the first shadow vehicle follows a vehicle in the distance of F, or the following distance. The next shadow truck and protection truck, I have to allow for the roll ahead distance labeled R So they can if they are hit, it will be safe and they won't impact the other vehicles. Please note on the instruction chart below the chart that the shadow and protection vehicle wheels should be pointed straight ahead, because if your vehicle is impacted, it will move in the direction that the wheels are pointed. Let's take a second just to test what we've gone through. Decision sight distance is the minimum distance required for the driver to respond to the presence of a work zone. Used to determine the minimum distance required for the driver to see a flagger, and used to determine if an operation qualifies as a mobile operation. All of the above is true. Mobile work zones must move the decision sight distance every hour. That is false. They must move the decision sight distance every 15 minutes. Channelizer spacing is always 25 feet. That is false. On high-speed roadways, the minimum is, or the channelizer spacing is 50 feet, and in tangent areas can be increased to 2 times that, or 100 feet. Let's take a look at multi-lane undivided roadways. Every section of the field manual contains an index of various layouts that you can find based on the type of the roadway, in this case, multi-lane undivided roads, the location of the work on the left column, and the duration of the work. You will also notice that some of these layouts are not contained in the multi-lane undivided road section. They're in other sections of the field manual. This was done to eliminate duplication. I always say, read all of the notes. So I won't say that anymore. I'll leave it to you to do that. I'm going to cover these in a very quick order. If there are questions, please ask those so I can answer those for you. This layout is not to be used on freeways or expressways. It's for 4-lane undivided, typically separated with a double yellow. The layout includes an option to use it for up to 1 hour, even though the devices look like mobile operation. The channelizing devices shown can be omitted if it is a mobile operation and moves at least a decision sight distance every 15 minutes. An additional protection vehicle can be added on the shoulder if needed. If this is on a roadway that's posted 40 miles per hour or less, the right lane closed and lane closed sign may be omitted as noted in note 2. A number of layouts will show this change. Where we used to show interchangeability, the merge sign or the lane reduction sign now is required after the right lane close. If the arrow board does not fit on the shoulder, then place it at the end of the taper. And remember, if you use an arrow board on the shoulder, to include a shoulder closure taper. This layout is for left lane closure on an undivided roadway. It shows taking additional southbound lane for the extra buffer space, not required on low speed or when workers are not present. It's always advisable to have that buffer space in the southbound lane to provide workers with an escape route if a vehicle intrudes into their workspace. This layout of a double lane closure, if under 40 miles an hour, the lane close and curve signs and keep right may be omitted. If the tangent length of the activity is 600 feet or less, use only the double reverse curve sign. Space channelizing devices at G spacing beginning at the end of the work zone. See appropriate layouts for the advanced signing approaching this. There you have to combine this layout with some other layouts to provide the advanced signing for this layout. This is the example that we used earlier. The lane close and right lane close signs again can be omitted for 40 miles an hour or less. Again, in this layout, the southbound lane closure may be omitted if workers are not present. The no turn signs are required if turns are prohibited. If the left turn is allowed, the insert shows channelizing device placement. It's important to know that you should contact the local road authority before placing signs or doing anything with signaled operations. Added reverse curve sign assembly, excuse me. This layout shows where the lane close type 3, where there's a L the taper length, where to use a large arrow type 3 in the lane shift. Very complicated layout, takes a lot of study. If under 40 miles an hour, the lane close and curve signs and the keep right may be omitted. Before closing a roadway, even for a short period of time, make sure you have the proper authorization from the road authority before doing that closure. The arrow board is required on a high-speed lane closure, and law enforcement may be used. Let's test your knowledge at this point. Layouts are listed by type of roadway, location of work, duration of work, type of work, or all of the above. Type of roadway, location, duration. If arrow boards are used, they are placed on the shoulder at the beginning of the taper. If there is no shoulder, they are not required. If there is no shoulder, they are placed at the end of the taper. And if arrow boards are used, they require a shoulder closure taper placed on the shoulder. They are typically placed at the beginning of the taper. If you don't have a shoulder, they're at the end of the taper, and they do require a shoulder closure taper placed on the shoulder. I'm losing my voice today. I'm very sorry. Let's take a look at multi-lane divided roadways, which are typically freeways and expressways. Again, the first is to select the layout. First, we need to know the type of roadway, then determine where the work will occur, and then determine the duration of the work. There are many layouts in this section that are not included in these slides in this webinar. In general, the layouts that are omitted are specifically for freeway operations, and we're focusing on local road operations today. Again, if this layout is used, the channelizers may be omitted if it's actually a mobile operation. Note that this is for 1 hour or less. The portable changeable message sign is required for nighttime operations. And the truck mounted attenuator is recommended for any vehicle that crouches into a traffic lane. Equipment and spacing varies based on specific conditions of the roadway. Remember, decision sight distance and the roll ahead distances are very important. A special note with these and other layouts in the field manual is the difference between required or shall be used, which is a minimum standard, like the changeable message sign here, And the truck mounted attenuator is recommended. It should be used, but is not required to be used. Note that the devices in this layout are all vehicle mounted, such as like in mobile operations, but this is for a short duration of 1 hour or less. Also important to note that if it moves a decision sight distance again, the channelizers may be omitted. When looking at layouts, always read the red boxes. They're very important. This is for low speed and for low speed roadway only 35 miles per hour or less. This layout is not to be used on higher speed roadways since workers do not have a safe escape route with traffic on both sides of the workspace. Also note drivers are being directed to merge to the left. It's important to give drivers a single direction. Use of a double arrow in this case often results in driver confusion, and experience has shown crashes result, including drivers hitting the arrow board. End of queue crashes on high-speed highways are a major cause of fatalities and serious injuries in work zones. On roadways with posted speed of 45 miles an hour or greater and queues over a half a mile long, it is recommended to use layout 58 with the passive zipper merge, warning drivers that there may be stopped traffic ahead and to share the lanes and take turns merging. Special note on these layouts, when closing 2 lanes, the lane closure tapers are separated with a tangent space of the length of 2L, 2 times the taper length, to allow drivers to adjust to the first lane closure taper and make a safe merge into the open lane. The reason for this is basic principle is to give drivers one decision at a time so that you know which decision they can make. If you give them 2 decisions, you won't know which decision they'll make. And a lot of times they'll make a third decision that's wrong. When lane closures extend more than 1,000 feet, the closed lane is delineated with a type 3 barricade or 3 type 2 channelizers such as drums. If it's less than 12 hours and the work zone is attended, cones may be used for this indication. It's important to recall from part 1 that cones may only be used in attended workspaces. If workers are not present, type 2 channelizers are required for all of these layouts. Note, lane shifts are only allowed for single lanes of traffic with a taper length of 1/2 L. Multiple lanes for lane shifts require temporary pavement markings to reduce driver confusion and unintentional lane changes in the shifting area. This is a very specialized workspace, primarily for working on traffic signals. Please note the 15-minute time limit and the recommendation to place the signal in all red flash. Again, when changing signal operations, make sure you have authorization from the local road authority. These layouts are similar to the layout we discussed earlier on selecting distances and determine proper device location. Please note that the lane closure tapers in advance of the intersection direct all the traffic into a single lane. Again, this is done to give drivers one decision at a time, providing for predictable driver behavior as they approach the work area. For these types of work zones, we're resurfacing in both lanes in both directions. Advanced signs are required for both directions, even though they're only showed from one direction on this layout. Use appropriate warning signs for the surface condition. including the bump signing, and this directs you to layout 80 for bump signing. And consider marking raised structures. If this is a milling operation and the manhole covers are raised, there are layouts and requirements for marking those structures. Let's take a moment to talk about what we've just talked about here. Truck mounted attenuators are required during mobile operations for any truck partially or totally in the lane. That is false. If you remember, they are recommended, they are not required. When closing two adjacent lanes on a divided roadway, you use one lane closure taper with the length of L. You use one lane closure taper with a length of 2L. You use two lane closure tapers with the length of L separated by a tangent of at least 2L. C is the correct answer. Lane closure tapers require a type 3 barricade in the closed lane every 1,000 feet. That is false. If you read the notes in the layout, it's 500 to 1,000 feet spacing, and you can replace the type 3 barricade with either a type 2 channelizer, such as a drum, or if it's an attended workspace, 3 traffic cones. Let's take a look at two-way continuous left turn lanes on multi-lane roadways. There are several layouts in there for 5-lane sections, having right lane or left lane closure or a double lane closure, and showing the different durations of work. For this operation, it's important to note that the left turn lane tapers are only 50 feet long, since this is not open to through traffic, only to vehicles making a left turn. Also, place no left turn signs as required by the governing road authority. Please note that arrow boards are required for this operation on high-speed roadways. Parking and stopping should be prohibited in this area, which sometimes requires advanced signing of the parking and stopping if there's parking in that area. And you have to coordinate that with the local road authority and law enforcement. Let's talk about speed limits and roundabouts that are in the miscellaneous section. There are other layouts in the miscellaneous section, which will be covered in part 4 of this webinar series. Minnesota DOT has work zone speed limit guide that covers speed limits on any work zone. Today, we're going to focus on those commonly used for short and intermediate term work zones. Remember, short term is 12 hours or less, and intermediate term is up to 3 days. Use of an advisory speed limit with a speed feedback sign is a very effective method of reducing vehicle speed through the work zone. It's important to note that for longer work zones, the speed feedback sign should be repeated where the workers are at least every mile. If a speed feedback sign is used with an advisory speed, it should only operate when the advisory speed is in effect and be removed or turned away from traffic when the advisory speed is no longer in effect. The speed feedback sign should also be mounted above, below, or beside the warning sign and advisory speed plaque. The speed limit in work zones when workers are present is contained in Minnesota statutes 169:14 and allows, or in some cases requires, the governing road authority to authorize the use of reduced maximum speed limits in highway work zones without having to conduct an engineering and traffic investigation. The required work zone speed limit of 45 miles an hour shall be used on a road with an established speed limit of 50 miles per hour or greater, or when at least one lane or portion of the lane is closed in either direction and workers are present, with the following exceptions. On the side of a divided highway with a median that does not include a temporary traffic control zone, where positive barriers are placed between workers and the travel portion of the roadway, where temporary traffic control zone devices are deployed for less than 24 hours, where 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week construction speed limit is in effect, or where different worker present speed limit is established by the local road authority. Aside from the required 45 mile per hour worker present speed limit, the local authority may establish a different speed limit value. Layout 83A and B detail this in the field manual. Please note that the restrictions and conditions on sign spacing. Again, it's recommended that you record the location and time of all speed limit signs when they're installed, when they're covered or removed. Multi-lane roundabouts are often easier to control than single-lane roundabouts during maintenance operations. One lane in the roundabout may be left open and will be treated as a single-lane roundabout. Even so, it's important to remember that commercial vehicles need additional space for off-tracking of trailer tires. Remember, approach signing and device spacing are the same in all 4 directions approaching the roundabout. Divided highways with medians wider than 8 feet, right and left lane signs, closure signs are required. If posted speed is greater than 45 miles an hour, an arrow board is required for those closures. Channelizing devices in roundabouts should be 10-foot spacing or adjusted for the condition of in the roundabout. Let's talk about what we just covered. Use of regulatory signs such as no left turn should be approved by the road authority or law enforcement. That is true. Worker present speed limits are required on all of the above. Roadways with posted speeds 50 miles an hour or greater, when workers are present and not protected by positive barrier, and when devices are deployed more than 24 hours. Multi-lane roundabouts are easier to work in than single-lane roundabouts. That is true. Sam, I'm talking too fast this morning. We didn't have any questions. I would entertain questions from the group on any of these layouts. I can go back and cover them, or if there's any other questions on multi-lane roadway traffic control. It doesn't look like that. I can give everyone back some time this morning. I appreciate your attention. And next week we are going to have part 4, which is miscellaneous layouts, and talk about those areas. And then part 5 following will be the flagging handbook overview. Just a note on the flagging one, that is not a replacement for flagger training. It's just going to be an overview of things that should be considered for flagging operations. Samantha, I've made it to the end in record time.
Wonderful. Well, looks like
Yep.
we don't have any questions in our Q&A as well.
Okay. Well, I wish everyone a successful summer season coming up for us and be safe in the work zones. And again, if you have any questions on this in the future, just let people know that there's experts at MnDOT, myself, I'm available. And good luck and be safe. Thank you.